Welcome, friends, to another episode of Product Lab, where we're talking about product strategies for startups through interviews, experiences, and stories with the founders. Today, we've got Brian Freeman, serial founder, current founder of Creatorland, and a good friend of the squad here. So we'll have lots of great insights into the creator economy, something we've been talking about a lot lately with all these new AI tools popping up. Chat GPT,
Crazy.
Mid-Journey, all of these things. How is it going to affect the economy? Stay tuned for a great episode. All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Product Lab, where we talk about the product strategies of startups through interviews, experiences, and stories from the founders. We got a real great guest today.
Oh, hell yeah.
Brian Freeman. He's a serial entrepreneur, multiple startup founder, built one of the largest influencer marketplaces in the world with over 1 million content creators and hundreds of great brands like Disney, Amazon, Marvel, Goop. His writing and work's been featured in the New York Times, Wired, TechCrunch, and Forbes. And he's here today to talk to us about his third and current startup, Creatorland. Welcome, Brian.
Woo, welcome, Brian.
Thank you, guys. Good to be here. I'm loving the setup. This is great.
Thanks. Yeah. New setup. Happy to have you. So as I mentioned, you and I have been collabing. You and the Polyform team have been collabing for so long. It's great to have you on the show here. Why don't we just jump right into it? Tell us all about Creatorland.
So let's do it. Okay, so Creatorland is founded on the premise that LinkedIn sucks for content creators. So came out recently this year that about 2022, late 2022, 96% of Gen Z North Americans just straight don't use LinkedIn. And a big part of this is that content creation is part of the very fabric of society for people under 25, literally making content, not just being consumers of it. And if you're a professional content creator, one of the things that I learned over my years in my previous company working in the creator economy, which is like a marketplace, was that creators need a way to showcase their work. They don't need a list of the places that they worked with the logo and 6 months being a punishment because you churned out too quickly because you weren't there for 2 years. That is just fundamentally flawed. The paper resume gone digital doesn't work for a world of freelancers. It doesn't work for a world of people who are using content creation and the expression through media and generating income from that in order to make and live the life that they want to live. It's just, we're seeing a shift in society, and Creatorland is like LinkedIn for a new generation. And so we've thought through, in partnership with Polyform and a lot of these things, what it means to be a content creator professionally, what's missing from that landscape now. And Creatorland is designed to help professionalize an ecosystem that has been living on the fringe despite being a part of everyday modern culture. So when we think about how Creatorland works for its members, being primarily the content creators, it's designed from the ground up to showcase creator work, their successes, to help build an index of who worked on those campaigns from the brand side to the creator side, and with a heavy focus on media, but also stats. It's a unified dashboard of combined social media statistics and also creator interests. So what kind of content creator am I? What is the type of work that I want to do? A lot of things that happen in the world of contracting people to make content for a brand or to become a brand spokesperson, or all these things are kind of blind to the rest of the economy and the rest of the people who aren't participating in the space. But almost every single initiative that a content creator gets contracted for starts over email, in the email that they've put in their bio. And guess who emails them in that email? All types of craziness. Imagine if we know what it's like being on LinkedIn as founders now. You get 150 DMs a day from all types of people that you just don't want to connect with. No offense, but most times service providers, right? Well, that's exactly what these content creators are dealing with every day. Their email is full of noise. And as a result, the best case scenario is an 8% response rate from people trying to give them money to do work. And a big part of that is the work is mismatched to their interests. They're trying to offer them a pay rate that isn't what they want to do. It's the type of work they might want to do, affiliate versus paid to create, unique content or to help tell a story or to be a long-term partner with the brand. And so our goal is to, just like LinkedIn in its early days, really streamline the hiring process by building awesome search, discovery, and messaging solutions for both the people who are trying to hire people in the content economy and people who are participating in it in order to earn a living. So that's maybe a longer description than I probably should have used, but that's what we're trying to do.
No, that's great, man. This is, a much needed product. We've obviously been talking a lot about it. Search being such a big part of it.
Huge. Yeah. Yeah. What about even like, it sounds like with the content creation space and maybe even like a reflection of this demographic, but like, it sounds like collaboration is so huge as well, for creators, right? Finding people who are perhaps in similar niches and bringing like a vision, whether it be a campaign or something larger to life. So is that also something that you guys have seen as well in terms of like the Creatorland play facilitating those collaborations, or is that kind of secondary?
So, excuse me, getting over a little bit of a cough here. The connection between creators making content is something that you see happening a lot in the top tier of creatordom. I think what we've become really used to seeing is someone who's famous, especially on TikTok and YouTube, introducing another person into their content, and that person being able to absorb followers from the person whose original account it was, and then that person's career being propelled into its next phase. This is super common at the higher tiers. I think almost every major YouTube group has this going on. Like you take the Nelk Boys, for example, a core YouTube channel that has maybe 8 or 9 people participating in the making of that content. 1 or 2 stars emerged early that are feeding subscribers into YouTube from something like an Instagram account. There's this guy, Steve Will Do It. I don't know, this is kind of a fun random element of the podcast. Maybe we didn't think we'd go down. I started following Steve Will Do It because I could not believe what this guy would do. This guy would just take a whole handle down of vodka, and it was like, how is this even on Instagram? He would take it down in like 45 seconds.
Oh my
God.
God.
So I was saying this around to my friends. I was like, you guys will not believe this dude. This is nuts. And so this guy was cranking these drinks out, and then they would film the aftermath. He blew up really quickly. This is kind of emerging Barstool time, like 2017, 2018. Then they started YouTube. He pushed those Instagram followers into the YouTube channel. There are a bunch of friends who were like all part of that crew. All of them are now in the YouTube channel. Now they also have their own Instagram. So you see content going up, going across, coming back out. And then these guys get smart and they come out with Happy Dad beer and like the Nelk Boys merch line. And like now they're doing collabs with other major creators who share that content on their YouTubes. And so you see this distribution and cross-pollination of followership that happens at the top level. But something that is very common when that's done well is there are people who know this formula who start to get involved and help them to help the creative talent to maximize this moment in the limelight. And that's a very finite resource. And so if you take smaller creators and like, let's say the people are just getting started and like, what does that look like to collab? It's missing a piece of this professionalized, like what the ingredients are for success. And the way to overcome that is to put more people together, both people who've had success and people who are on their way up, who might have something niche interesting going on, and make them more discoverable between one another and give them a platform for discovery, communication, and peel back the curtain that exists between all content creators because they don't have a central landscape for this on things like statistics, the ability to compare themselves to each other, to track each other's progress in a meaningful way. And then, when we think about LinkedIn, it's become so consistent in most of our daily lives, despite how much spam we see on there, that we're all doing this organically by being present there. Your network is what's populating that feed, sure, but you also, like when you go to a networking event or something and you meet somebody and you make a new friend, you're probably going to connect with them on LinkedIn. And as they move through the ranks of their career, you get notified of that. And so you might say to yourself one day, you get an email notification, oh, Greta got a new, added a new advisorship to her profile. that pings me to text Greta and go, hey, I hadn't heard about that company. She goes, oh, well, you guys should talk to them. Actually, they're in the same type of deal you are. You guys should collab. But
Right.
she doesn't use the word collab. She says, you guys should chat. And so what
Yeah.
that means is I made a new business connection because I saw a friend of mine who I had made a permanent business link to have an experience that triggered something for me to reach out. That can't happen if everybody lives in their own silo making content by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I think, what your question was, what is collaboration, and do we see people making content with one another? We see it that way, but we see it in this like much wider lens of collaboration is also the like everybody's boat lifting up, because now we can see how each other are finding success, and we can tap into that success to benefit ourselves and also to benefit others. But you can't do that if you don't know what the hell is going on, and all you're seeing is the work product, which is what everybody sees on social media. Sometimes
Right.
followers are the result of work. It's the equivalent of, I don't know, having a good marks on a, review at your business.
Right. Yeah. So many good points there. I love the bit about kind of pulling the curtain back on this whole process, because as you said, everybody's kind of in a silo, and so much is going on in emails and DMs. There's like no real transparency. And something beautiful about LinkedIn, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, is that like everybody there in some way or another is there to like conduct business.
Yeah.
So to slide into somebody's DMs and talk about a meeting or possible synergies and stuff is like a natural motion in that environment that I'm in. But when you're, a star on YouTube or Instagram or something like that, those platforms aren't built around that. So it's kind of an awkward business networking environment and tool. So to now have a new place to go where that is the reason to be there, super valuable. And speaking about like opening the curtain, obviously you've got tremendous insight into this whole creator economy. This is not your first startup in the space. Why don't you give the listeners a little bit of your story, your background, where you come from, how you acquired all this knowledge and insight to help you with Creatorland?
Yeah. Well, I kind of fell into it. So I grew up in San Diego, was always kind of a tech guy, built computers in high school for my friends for extra cash, and first job was Circuit City, which ages me a little bit because those guys went bankrupt a long time ago. But I was the guy in high school burning CDs off Napster and making money from. I was the guy, like, I couldn't get X-Wing Alliance to work on my Mac, so I had to build a PC in order to play that epic game, and so
Very
it was
good.
that kind of thing. And so I grew up. Actually, I built my first community for a game called Jedi Knight 2 on MSN Gaming Zone, which would like pair the like 56K modems together in this like unbelievably low res environment. It had like a chat thing, and I built this whole clan up to like 400 guys who would do like lightsaber battles and all this stuff.
Wow.
And they found out I was 11 and kicked me out. But it was good while it lasted. So and I started my first real startup was a company called Wildfire that I started out of a startup I had been working at, and then went full time on. It literally was Valentine's Day 2013, 2014, ironically enough. But and that was the first real dating app targeting to make a better experience for women. Now, it was flawed in its premise in a way because it was guys who were making it. It was three or four guys got together like, we're going to make a dating app that's targeting women, making it better for them. So there's a piece of this equation that was missing. But we were growing through college rollouts, and this is pre-Bumble, and we got sororities to promote the app on campus, and we set them up in a competition with one another. And they would the first competition that was won by Alpha Phi in San Diego State, and they won by promoting the competition on their own personal social media channels. So it was primarily Instagram. And so we did a number of rollouts after that and got very good at this kind of offline format for promotion via regular people or these young women in colleges through their Instagram accounts. And that had a direct link to generating incredible traffic for our startup. And that was 2014, 2015. unfortunately, Bumble had a much better shot of success than we ever did. And by the time they had started to get some real traction by the second quarter of 2015, it was pretty clear that that wasn't a fight worth fighting. And so
Yeah.
we ended up pivoting the company. The other guys kind of went back to their day jobs, and I stuck with it to try and find something that would work. And initially I thought it was going to be a social dating app called Heartbeat, that was kind of like a Snap plus Instagram plus dating. Honestly, I took the last 10K we had in the bank and made a commercial on like a flyer because it was do or die. That actually worked. We were able to raise a little bit of money from it, and
Nice.
but by the end of the year, it was clear that this 100K that we had brought in wasn't going to build this epic app, and we were at a crossroads. Um, and I had been like very low on cash personally. I was barely making rent. It was tough times. And I was on the phone with a friend of mine who had gone through an accelerator called Techstars, which we ended up going through for my former company, Heartbeat. And I was kind of like singing the blues to her about like, oh, we got screwed by Bumble. I don't know what we're gonna do. I kept not having the success I wanted to with this whole dating thing. And she goes, well, you turn that whole offline college thing into a pseudo online thing with like this email list. It was something we had done. We had like made it so people could sign up to be on a promotion list and get paid to post. She said, you got like a few thousands people, right? And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I got it, but there's no app to promote. She's like, yeah, but hold on. Would they promote other companies? I was like, well, no one's ever done that before. Maybe. And so she's like, okay, well, let me see what I can do. So she actually ended up rounding up some brands from Techstars that were like direct to consumer startups.
Yeah.
And I did an email blast, and out of 3,000 people, we had 12 or 1,300 of them raise their hand and say, hell yeah, I'll post for XYZ company. And so that was the birth of my previous business, which was a nano influencer marketplace, really the first one. So over time, we learned what it meant for brands to think about this smaller creator and how that person promotes a product through social, what the pricing should look like, what the education needs to be like to onboard someone who had never done content creation and do it professionally, and then what the systems needed to be to do that at scale. And so we learned a lot over those years, from teaching brands the power of working with content creators, to being able to onboard and like leverage that much talent, hundreds of thousands of content creators who want to participate in things, or people who are just curious. And the thing that's really fun is that Heartbeat has had 200,000 individual creators do campaigns over the years. And so
Wow.
it's a pretty amazing story there. And there's over 6 or 7 thousand of them who've done more than 100 campaigns. And
Wow.
that business helped not just kickstart my career in content creation, but the careers of tens of thousands of creators who wouldn't have had a chance because they had too small of a following.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it was really the right seed to plant for me to help me understand what was wrong with the industry. And what's wrong with the industry is just it's a very lonely place. The information is sporadic at best, and all the cards are really in the hands of the people with the money, and
Hmm.
that's brands. So they get to tell you how much you're worth. They get to tell you, and you're just as good as the last campaign you did, because there's no central ecosystem for this is who I am. This is the work that I've done. Anybody can see that. If I want to know if, let's say one of you guys is a professional content creator, if I want to know what you've done in the past, I got to ask you, and you send me some
Yeah,
links.
exactly. Yeah, and you got to take my word for it as well around like the
Yeah.
metrics and like how well it did and everything. I
Yeah.
could be fudging that stuff out, right? It's just so I can ensure that next gig, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I think the brands are really the ones that benefit the most from the lack of transparency
Oh,
that's
for
out
sure.
there because like you said, they can kind of dictate everything. There's no open marketplace where the economy and value sets the prices of things or
Mhm.
standardizes packages or service offerings or anything like this. So to kind of, like you were saying before, open the curtain to a lot of that stuff, I think is really interesting because over time I think it'll just, like you said, kind of raise the waters of the whole industry and help creators realize the value of what they're putting out there.
Another dynamic that along those lines that comes to mind is that there's the lack of information transparency creates these really lagging systems which keep the economy from being bigger than it could be. So you mentioned in a marketplace setting, if you're overpriced or you're underpriced, there's a reflection of that that's usually pretty consistent, right? Like you get feedback on that pretty quickly. If you're overpriced, you don't get opportunities. If you're underpriced, you get too many and you're like, okay, well, maybe I need to raise my prices a little bit. I'm tapping into the wrong market or something. Over the years during boom and bust periods, we saw that creators would be asking for very high prices, but the boom period had waned, or we were during a time where buying was really light. And so if you're out there pricing yourself much higher than there is a willingness to purchase, you're like, if someone's like, hey, I'll do something for $1,000, has the same stats as another person who's charging $4,000 for the same thing, no one's buying that $4,000 thing because it's the same. But because you don't know there are other people out there doing this, because you don't have access to those people, there's no safe space to have that type of feedback and collaborative, like we're all in this together type environment. You're overpricing yourself and not getting deals. You go 4 months of that, it would have been better to take just one lower price opportunity. And so, that's just another argument for it's better when there's more people in one place, because you're just, that lack of transparency is killing everybody.
Totally.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love hearing the founder stories where, they're like you, finding a solution to some big problem. And, when you say it, it sounds so obvious, but when you talk about your background and the history, you're like, oh yeah, this is like a decade of research to come to these conclusions and experience and working with all these creators and stuff. It's, super interesting and inspiring, and I think tells the story of like where startups come from in a really cool way. Speaking of like coming from, something Product Lab's all about, Polyform Studios all about, is helping startups, come from an idea to that first version of the thing. Obviously, Creatorland's not your first thing, but what are some of the steps, maybe lessons you learned even from going from 0 to 1? Maybe with some of those first startups, or the first time you actually built something and shipped it to market.
Yeah, that's and I'll say the experience of Creatorland, having been a founder for since 2013, has been really different, and reminded me of some things. Well, actually, like Heartbeat's been making my previous company had been making money for a long time. That was really how we got started, was generating income. So it's been a long time since I had a startup that was pre revenue, and just something that dawned on me in the last couple months, like, it's a little bit of an uncomfortable place to be. I forgot about this. But no, the thing that the biggest difference is having, which is something I just really appreciate for first time founders, because I remember what that was like, is there's so much, just like for, I think, creators in a way, there's a lot of gaps. You don't know who to trust. You don't know where to go to get your first check. You don't know what it really takes to get the first check from an investor, if that's what you're trying to do. There's so many systems and things out there now to help, but if you're just getting started, it's just so overwhelming, because like there's this massive industry around enabling technology startups. And if you rewind the clock 8 years or 9 years, it was coming to life and it was there, but it wasn't this like system like it is today. Like startups are like, there are probably 10,000 startups that are surviving strictly on serving other startups. It's just kind of .com bubble-esque, but that's, so there's just so much to navigate. And for getting started with Creatorland, I was able to tap into people like Polyform, people who have become advisors for Creatorland that I have known over the years that I knew were fantastic in different sectors, like artificial intelligence or recruiting or finding development talent. And it was really hard in the early days to, with my previous company, it was who can I find that will work for $15 an hour?
Yeah.
And because I had no track record, I had no one had a real good reason to believe in me. So you're pulling in people who are totally edge, like I was, and which has its pros and cons. And we're all kind of figuring out all of these lessons for the first time. And at the end of the day, lessons are expensive, and hiring is making the wrong hire is expensive.
Yeah.
And it also grates the team. First time founder going through and figuring things out on their own. First time, from how to be a decent manager or leader to finding out your real strengths and weaknesses. That can be very hard on a team of people who don't have the same kind of equity you do, maybe don't have the same type of lifestyle in mind that you do. And so I think one of my biggest lessons that I could take away as a third time founder is just how I've grown to understand my own strengths and weaknesses, and what that means in terms of building a team around you, and how to ensure that like you don't try and be everything. And that when you bring people in, you're bringing people in who are filling gaps in your own skill set, and that you don't override them. I think one of the things that can be really tempting, and it hurt me big time in my previous company, is you get used to this very early stage of you're driving the bus, and you're kind of also like doing the wheel maintenance, and you're also filling the gas, and you're also like mining the oil that becomes the gas and refining it, and pushing this motif too far. But like when you start to get bigger, you keep doing that, you're going to lose great people, and your glass door is going to go through the floor, and you will suck to work for. And so you really have to push yourself to grow and enable your team to win through letting them do what they do best. And I say that was the biggest mistake I made for years, and the biggest takeaway I can give to first-time founders that kind of make it through that first or second raise.
Gems.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff there. Let the pros do what they're best at, right? Instead of, it's so easy to like try to like micromanage, or like the helicopter parent metaphor, right? Where you're like constantly hovering, watching the work that's being done.
If you want it done right, you do it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Moving away from that kind of mentality,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'll just do it myself.
As like a designer found design studio, where have certainly in the past been guilty of that as well. Dude. Where it's like, that's not quite designed the way I would do it. Let me just get into that file and make a bunch of changes, and the designers hate it. And that's also been a good lesson we've learned, I think, is take your hand off a little bit, hire the right people, enable them to do their best work, mentor them where there's gaps, and the same for yourself. Like you said, be able to look at yourself subjectively and see where you're doing great work, see where you're getting in the way, see what you're shitty at, and try and fill those gaps with other people.
Totally.
So there's one more thing. One more that I feel like is really present for Creatorland, my experience, and the three of our experiences together on what we've been doing with Polyform is, our listeners don't know, Polyform has a research sprint, multiple research sprints built into every initiative that they do. And that is really critical. I mean, actually with Creatorland, we spent, despite having 8 years in the industry, 3 to 4 months in the kind of research and discovery phase of what we were doing, which included interviewing potential creators. My experience had been at this kind of like very high level with placing hundreds of people in campaigns, and we had an awesome survey tool at the previous company and stuff. So we had an understanding of people through the way they would flow through a system and what we could get at scale and that kind of thing. But we didn't have like deep personal relationships with creators and like that had made it that we really understood. So we really needed to kind of get into the psyche of our potential customer and understand their problems, and then also understand the landscape and what had emerged, what had been done in the past, and what had failed. And I think there's a romanticization of the garage startup where like you're just powering through obstacles and getting over the hump and stuff. And some of that's real, but what's more real is really understanding the market that you're going after so that you don't just, overcommit in any one direction, and also blindly build pointlessly without a real relationship with the customer that you're building for. And that, I feel like, has been a major issue in the creator economy, even through the funding boom that started at the beginning of the pandemic. So anyway, that's the last thing I'll say is do the damn research.
I love that you bring this up. This is a huge part of it, and something that, on Product Lab, we try and get to with everybody. We didn't even have to ask you about it. You just brought it up. But, I want to go a little bit deeper on like, what does that mean? Customer collaboration, as you know, is something we push really strong at Polyform here. And it's not just making a persona for who this person is. It's interviews. It's getting a community together in Discord or on social or whatever, and interacting with them, asking them, maybe having like a board together. What are some of the strategies you've been using, and how have you seen those paid off? What would you recommend for a startup that's, low on cash, high on excitement, trying to learn from their customers how to build the best thing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the strategy that we used at Creatorland was to leverage some of the kind of early waitlist strategies that I had kind of started to do with, we did it first with the wildfire dating app, and then we did it with Heartbeat, and we're doing it again with Creatorland, where you just get an initial cohort of people into an email list. And so it starts at the landing page, a little bit of the value prop that you're selling, and then some low code solutions in order to enable a version of the experience that you think you want to do. And we were able to do this with like a couple $1,000s. So like this is, we didn't overcommit. We didn't need to raise a bunch of money to do it. We used Typeform, Airtable, and a custom landing page. And this allowed us to kind of get an initial 300 or 400 people into an email list. And that number could have been 30 or 40. And from there, you want to start sending out communications and asking for feedback. It doesn't always have to be some elaborate surveying system. You can use surveying. I recommend Typeform is a really easy to use and beautiful builder for surveys. But it could just be, hey, reply to this email with what you think here. This is what we're thinking. I've got A or B or C as directions. And then if you get 5 or 6 pieces of feedback, you might be like, well, that's not statistically significant. 30 or more gives me a direct. It'll give you way more than you had before. Yeah. And even to the point where we emailed people our list and said, or we actually carved a cohort out, because during the onboarding process, I do recommend that you ask for some specific details from people after they've given you your email, so you can get a sense of who's there, and it should be relevant to the product that you're building. And so we carved a group out of higher follower YouTube accounts and said, hey, we'll give you $50 if you'll hop on a hour-long call with us. We had 30 responses of people to do that. We didn't have enough time to interview all the people who wanted to participate, but that gave us some incredible insights. Sitting down with people, you give 2 minutes of what you're aiming to do, but then you get into what their wants and needs are. So we created an initial question set. We tried to stay true to keep that question set throughout the interviewing process, because if you spend a bunch of time talking about yourself, go down weird rabbit holes, get off topic, you're going to lose a lot of the value. You really want to try and create like a consistent messaging flow, so you can compare apples to apples. And then in addition to that, we, instead of paying for a bunch of community software or trying to build some kind of massive community tool, we chose Discord and worked Discord into the onboarding sequence and the post onboarding sequence, and all of our communications during the kind of recruitment process of people into the waitlist. We really emphasized be in our Discord. That's where our community lives. We used a lightweight framework for making sure you had an email in our database before you could get in. And we've grown that community over 350 people. And then it's your on-demand customer engagement portal. I mean, it's the best thing we've ever done.
Amazing.
It's so smart. Now, like, is that collaboration still part of Creatorland now? Like when we're talking about like rolling out like a new feature or making like a change to this particular thing based on data that we've seen, are we still tapping into that community and saying like, hey, how are you guys feeling about this? Is there some kind of like feedback loop there?
Yeah, I think there is. And I think the best example we have of that recently was when we were working with you guys on the messaging hierarchy for our new landing page. So Creatorland, this website now, the way that we talk about the value propositions and in what order came from us asking the Discord community to rank from like 5 or 6 different value propositions by adding an emoji to the one they like the most. Which one of these speaks to you as the most important? And it changed actually the trajectory of the build and the focus of the of a lot of these pieces of the features. Is we understood that opportunity for discovery was at the very top of their list. It's like, hey, I'm down to collaborate with other creators, but not if I can't pay my bills. I want a place that I can be accessed more often. I want to be able to see what brands are looking at me. I want to know how I'm doing in my career. And that's my most important thing. And then the second most important thing was education and learning. It was more that peeling back of mystery, providing professional, vetted, high quality advice and education materials. And then the third one was professional networking with peers. And then the rest were so lightly tapped that it was insignificant to even think about them. So that I think is just a lightweight example, but it was so formative for us.
That's amazing. This is like gems here. You know, for a first-time founder, just getting their feet wet, trying to figure out what people want. This is actionable advice, doesn't cost a lot. And as you said, so insightful to just ask the people, right? Get some people together, ask them. You know, the $50 gift card approach is great for longer term, you know, want to have more of a long form interview, but the Discord with the emojis and stuff is just immediate feedback, super valuable stuff there. I think, you know, towards the end of our Product Lab podcast here, we always like to do a few rapid fire questions and just, you know, again, with the actionable advice focused on, you know, just some rapid fire stuff that's going to help the first time founder, you know, exactly. Young Brian.
Yeah. Brian day one.
Yeah. Brian day one. What would Brian want to hear? One of the questions, first one, what advice, you know, now you're onto your third startup, Creatorland, you're doing all these things different. If you could go back to Wildfire Brian, what would be like the core piece of advice you would give him in a couple of sentences?
So every great company and every great product is a team. That's it. It's people. And so you, like, I think I dove in the excitement of the startup and didn't take the time to plan out who was working on what and what the real responsibilities were and what the expectations were longer term. And I've seen this a lot with founders who have challenges with their co-founders later on, is a misalignment of expectations. And that can be expensive and it's always emotionally painful. And so the sooner you, in your journey, in your partnership with your co-founders, can become very clear on what everybody's roles and responsibilities are and what the expectations are, and do very regular check-ins with that, the less you're going to feel pain later on in the life cycle of the business.
Oh, very that's good. Great advice. Yeah, startups are a team sport, right? You know, that's the way to look at it. I've actually got one as well. So super rapid fire as well. You know, thinking about like Wildfire Brian, who was the first hire that he made versus the first hire that Creatorland Brian made?
Yeah. Well, the first hire at Wildfire was like a social person.
Okay.
And the first hire at Creatorland was a developer.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's like a symptom of like the differences in between those two businesses, right? Like the social, getting like the sororities, you know, word of mouth kind of thing was like most pivotal for Wildfire versus like we need to have something to show for Creatorland. Maybe that could have been the motivation, or was it just...
Yeah, I mean, this was part of that dating app boom where hype was king. And like we needed the social validation of like press to like help us even know that we were in the right direction, because we were also green too. But like we had, it was like a social ground hype type hire, like doing those college rollouts. But at the end of the day, the product wasn't very good. So that was a part of the problem of the competitiveness. Like, I mean, I think we rolled out that fucking app with no notifications. Like, I don't know what we
Oh,
were
Right.
doing.
Focus
Just
on the
bad.
product. I
yeah.
love
Yeah.
it. What? Okay, so this is another really good one because I know you mentioned Techstars a couple times. I know you're involved with them. OG graduate. For a new startup, you're a couple of college kids. Maybe one of you is a developer. You've got an MVP in your hand. You've got a good idea. Maybe a tiny bit of traction. Probably not making any money. Um, what kind of advice would you give that person in terms of the world of raising capital or joining accelerators or this kind of thing? What would you do if you were in those
Yeah.
shoes again?
I don't think I would be where I am today if I hadn't gone through Techstars. We that was a pivotal moment in my career. It completely changed my personal network. It exposed me
Mm,
to some of my best friends today, but it also put us through this gauntlet that really forced us to be real about the way that we could make an impact with our company and go from this. It was, that previous business was kind of like it was an email list with like some light tech built around it. And it helped us. And Adam, you and I worked on this in 2018, migrated from that form of itself to this integrated network that had a really bright and interesting future and led to the next few financings of the company. So for me, the accelerator was more than just acceleration. It was a tribe, and it also was the like education I needed to go from being
mm.
someone who just really wanted something to having a real shot at actually doing something. So yeah, I highly, highly recommend participating in accelerators. And we did a couple of them. There was one that we did, which was great in 2014, and then we ended up doing the Techstars one as well. And I know people can feel frustrated about the equity that sometimes you have to give up, and there's
Yeah.
sometimes more negotiating room than you think in there. But I mean, I'm in the Techstars Discord community with like 4,000 other Techstars alumni every single day.
Wow. Yeah,
It's
you mentioned
meaningful.
so often the impact your network has had on your every one of these businesses, right? From
Mhm.
the inspiration to transform Wildfire into Heartbeat to bringing on the right people now with Creatorland from your existing network. I think especially for those who are just starting out that don't have a big network, maybe from their career yet, great option there to really fast track that bit. What about raising money? Let's say
Yeah.
you're looking to raise money for the first time ever. You've been watching some YouTube videos from Y Combinator Startup School or something. Now it's time to like actually try and get some decks in front of people. How would you what would you recommend as the first few steps for somebody in this situation for the first time?
So this might be less of what people would guess I would say, but something I did differently with Creatorland than I did with Heartbeat. With Heartbeat was I need money. I'm gonna make whatever sacrifice I need to make in order to get that money. And
Mm,
over time, as the company became more successful, as we looked at later downstage financings, that became a huge issue. So how much equity I had was a deterrent for future for those other investors looking at it. They're like, this guy's just not going to stick with the business with this kind of equity, and it ended up one day becoming true. But so what I would do, and what I did do, is do some light road mapping on like targets for amount raised, what I think I can do with it, and the dilution target that I had for that. Because if
mm,
you are successful and you learn and you grow and your company grows, you're going to be parting with about a certain amount of equity at each raise cycle. And you
mm,
don't want to be two raises in without enough to do the next one.
Mhm.
And
right.
good investors will understand that. And it's so that's the first thing I would do is just some lightweight planning, because it helps you wrap your mind around what you're trying to do and what kind of bands you have in terms of the valuation that you're raising at and how much you want to bring in and how much you might want to also be conservative, like about how you're spending money, and build that into the relationships that you uh, form with the people who are working on your business. Um, so that's one thing I would do. I think the second is accelerators can be really helpful for this. Actually, one of our developers at Creatorland is unfortunately leaving us because his startup he'd worked on for 2 years and finally got into an accelerator. We're super pumped for him, but and that was his first money in. So it's like $100,000 or something. And then the accelerator comes around you and helps you be really smart about how to use that capital to get to your next milestone. But almost including all of my companies, it always starts with friends and family. So you kind of get that initial target amount that you want to raise, and then you start pulling people in, typically now through something called a safe note. If you Google Y Combinator Safe, this is a much better instrument than what we had to use 10 years ago, which were these longer convertible note docs you had to explain to everybody, and they sucked. But these safes are great, and I would bring in any amount. Let whoever come in for $5,000. Just get the cash in. Don't go crazy with spending it, and don't do crazy big cost deals that you can't afford, and then part with it all at once. You really got to push yourself to the next milestone and demonstrate traction and communicate to that group and external community often the progress you're making, and you'll find more ways to raise money. But raising money right now is hard. Angels are hard to bring capital in from. So if it were someone was looking at this in the next 3 to 5 months, I would say pursuing accelerators is a way to help overcome some of the challenges of raising capital in a down market.
Yeah, this is great advice. Great actionable advice there. Got any other ones?
Well, we got one more. This is a little bit of like an unorthodox one, but I think Brian is he's a good guy to ask this one. So Brian, we're talking about a lifetime of 3 different startups, right? All the way from Wildfire, Heartbeat, and now Creatorland. Thinking back, back in the day, early Brian, Wildfire Brian, was there a piece of advice maybe that you had received earlier back then that you had totally dismissed as like, you know what, that's totally irrelevant to me in my space, only to find out that it was ultra appropriate maybe later on?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, when I was pivoting the dating app to Heartbeat, my kind of mentor was like, shut the other business down and start fresh. These are not related, and you're going to pay for it later if you don't. And he's like, you've raised really low valuations. You're already really diluted. Just start fresh. Life is long. They'll understand. Those investors will understand. And I was green, and like, this is going to sound pretty callous, and it's not, everybody who knows me knows this is not who I am. But investors, when they invest in you, even if it's your family, are making a bet. And a lot of bets don't work. And it's your life. And I was like, no, I need to protect everybody. I got to protect everybody. Pivot it. So we pivoted into a company where 40% of the equity had already been sold. And that became incredibly, incredibly painful later. And there's really no good way to get out from under that. And so I disregarded that advice, thought I knew best. I didn't want to go through the pain of bad news. That was really at the core of it. I did not want to disappoint people. And so what I ended up doing was sacrificing my future because I didn't want to have hard combos. And I didn't know how to have them, but it was mostly I didn't want to, I had a complex around disappointing people. That was a huge error, and it's not an error I'd make again.
Wow, that's a very human, very honest response to that one. That's very good. Yeah. We were talking about this question the other day, and I was like, oh man, when people first told me about NFTs, I was like, that's stupid.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I wish I had bought some of those cartoon monkeys.
Dude, I remember like we had met Artifact for the first time, and they were like, trust me, people are going to want to collect digital shoes. We're like, there's no way. There's no way people would ever want to do that.
Yeah.
And then, fast
That's how
forward.
I felt too. Yeah.
Exactly, right?
We're all a pretty surface level answer compared to
we had
to
too
what
many
you gave
decades
us there.
under our belt. We were too cynical.
Yeah, that's right. We got to keep the cynicism out of it.
That's right.
Well, we're coming to a close here. Thank you so much for being with us today, Brian. Always a pleasure to chat with you and to hear your story and many gems of advice.
It was really good, dude. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no, I'm so happy to have been here. This is super fun. And I can't wait to get back to Vancouver.
When you're up next,
overdue.
you know who to look up. We'll be happy to have you head up to Whistler and do some riding.
100%.
Hell yeah. Oh yeah.
Amazing. All right, thanks, bud.
Thanks, Brian.
Guys.
Have a fantastic week. You
See
too.
you next time.
Later, dude.
Thank you.
Later.
Brian, what a good dude, eh?
Absolutely, man. Unbelievable.
Yeah,
really like actionable advice as well. You know, I feel like with a lot of these things, it's like really anecdotal, really specific to somebody's unique experience. But with him, I feel like there's just a ton of applicableness for, you know, everybody listening, regardless of the stage.
This is something, you know, we want to try and bring every episode is for first-time founders to be able to listen and get something out of it that they can put into action today. It's not some big philosophical startup thing. It's not something you need a bunch of money. You know, he brought up, which I love because we barely had to prompt him for it, but he brought up building a community of your customers very early so you can ask them questions and stuff. And that whole collaborative design with the user is of course what we're all about, right?
Absolutely. Putting them at like the center of like the decision making, I think is pivotal. And I think that's like something that Brian really mentioned as well, or like really put a lot of importance around, right? Was like, you're not necessarily your customer in every instance, right? So like listening to what's going on in them, the problems, the areas of improvement that they're experiencing, and then baking that in. You know, people will tell you, you know, even if it's like something like a gift card or something to kind of coax the answer out of them, you know, people want to give advice. And if you ask them for it, you know, they'll deliver. So
I think being studio guys, this is something we kind of naturally trend towards, is that like it's impossible for us to be experts in all the industries that we make products for. So it's so important in the early days. And Brian mentioned the research phase we have up front, the discovery research bit, that we talk to the users. We get our heads into the mind of the users, right? And I think sometimes as a startup founder where you're just focused on one niche, you're focused on one little thing that you're making, it's easy to think that you know everything about it, and that you know, especially, like, I hate to say it, but especially engineers, you know, people who are coming from a development background, you know, you can start with the technology and just assume everybody's going to think it's a great solution to their problem. And until you're really speaking to these folks, you don't really know. So great actionable advice there from Brian. You can check out Creatorland at creatorland.xyz. You know, he's going to be launching a new version of the product anytime. When you're there, hit up the Discord. If you're interested in content creation, if you're a person who's maybe looking to get into that industry with your own startup, or you are yourself a content creator, hit the Discord. There's lots of cool stuff happening in there, and get a little taste of what he's up to with the user collaboration.
All right, guys. Thanks again for joining us on this episode. Make sure you subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, or wherever you're tuning in from. And while you're at it, drop us a rating as well. We love that. We'd really appreciate it, especially if it was a good one. And thanks again for tuning in.